So let's start with the idea of where is trust today? And where it is today is it's in a very, very scary place. And it's not just scary from, as we've talked about, the loss, the sense of displacement, the sense of lack of connection. It's actually scary in a much more fundamental way. If we take a look at it, that over the last 5 years, the lack of trust and the way that that's showing up in workplace culture is running at about $223 billion. And then if we take a look at where trust and leadership is, one of the things that Jeff and I talk extensively about in the book is something, if you're not familiar with it, it's called the Edelman Trust Barometer. For 20 years, they have been measuring trust for 4 major groups: business, non-government organizations, media, and government. The nice thing is that I can let you know is the numbers are consistent. They're consistently down. They're continuing to go down. Businesses come in at the top at a whopping 49% of people trust businesses. So that's a pretty terrifying thing in and of itself. And the other thing that's really frightening is even though only 49%, so 51% of the people don't trust business leadership, they actually feel like business leadership is in the best position to address the issues that society is dealing with. 60% of the reason people leave organizations is because of a leader. Toxic or just bad. It doesn't matter. That's why they leave. And so what I would submit is that, Doug references leadership, the leadership models that we are still teaching in our colleges and universities. God bless his soul, as we say down south, is Frederick W. Taylor, if you're familiar with him in scientific management, was that when we create an industrial society, is the idea is you take things and you break them into as small as piece as possible because people are stupid and they're not to be trusted. And we've embraced that model for the last close to 200 years. And so, one of the things that's kind of frightening about that is the cost of that. To me, I don't know, 223 billion here, 223 billion there. You're starting to talk about real money. We're also talking about things like when we talk about quiet quitting. I refer to myself sometimes as a recovering human resources professional. I left that field a while back. There's nothing new about quiet quitting. One of the things we talk a lot about these days is the concept of employee engagement. And I've had a lot of CEOs now, when we talk about that, say, well, what's the worst thing they can do? They can leave if they're unhappy. And the answer is that's not the worst thing they can do. There's a group, both in the UK and the United States, about 18% that are what we call actively disengaged. They quit, they just don't leave. Okay, what they do is they become toxic in your workplace and they spread that toxicity every day. One of my favorite authors these days is a gentleman named Stephen M.R. Covey. For those of you who remember his father who wrote The 7 Habits of Almost Everything, that's not him, this is his son. He wrote a brilliant book a couple years ago called The Speed of Trust. And he made a comment that says every organization in the world is either generating a trust dividend or you're paying a trust tax. And you make a cognitive choice as to which you're going to do. But you are going to make that choice and you are going to see it reflected in the performance of your organization. $5 trillion to the US economy for employee turnover. And then we add in an additional $200 billion a year for presenteeism that shows up in absenteeism, that shows up in healthcare, that shows up in a variety of different ways. I'm not as smart or as good at with numbers as some of my colleagues are, but you start looking at those things and, 5 trillion here and you're talking about real money there. And you think about the things that we could accomplish, and this is money that we're spending. This is not government money that we need to put back in it. This is a way of saying we are literally leaving that money on the table. And a big part of it that is really frightening is to go back to leadership. 60% of aspiring leaders go into a leadership role for one reason. Anybody want to take a wild shot at what that is? That's exactly right. That's why they go into leadership. They don't want to make the world a better place. They don't want to train people. They don't want to build relationships. They want to make more money and they want to get promoted. That's not really a great model to start with when we're talking about people leading the organization and putting our trust in. So, this is also a little bit scary. Another one of my pet authors is a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni. And he talks about the concept of job misery. And job misery is exactly what's implied there, is it says that where people are at in their lives and everything, but with their job, is it I'm gonna take a wild guess and say at some point in each of your lives on Sunday night, you had a little bit of stress, a little bit of concern about getting up and going to work on Monday morning. Okay, that's job misery and how it manifests itself. And job misery is something that happens to a lot of different people, and it's very personal. For some people, it's a case that their expectations and their compensation aren't aligned. In other cases, it's a case that they work for a tyrant or they work in a toxic environment that they don't feel like they can be out of there. But it's real. So how do you fix it? The core dimensions of what causes this, according to Lencioni, or the first one is anonymity. Who am I? Do I matter? If I stop showing up tomorrow to my job, would anybody notice? You know, how long would it take? The second one is the whole idea of irrelevance, is do what I do matter? It's, I worked in a lot of corporate organizations, and the thing that's very interesting when we talk about line and staff, we talk about revenue producers and overhead and things like that. Well, kind of what that's sending a message to somebody, if you're not actually out there in a direct facing revenue position, you're kind of irrelevant. And people feel that way. I'm coming to work, I'm spending the majority of my adult life there, but does anybody care? Again, do I feel relevant? Do I feel connected? And then the last dimension is the idea of immeasurement, is how do you measure those contributions and how do you connect people up? So, 3 obstacles. The first obstacle is employee obstacles, is everybody in the world is carrying their little sack of poo with them. I wrote a book a few years ago called Managing Whole People. When I was a young HR guy, we were told people don't get to have feelings. Okay, you come to work and we own you for 8 to 12 hours a day and park your baggage at the door, and we don't want to hear about your issues with childcare or anything like that. You're here to do work and that's what we pay you for. And that was the philosophy. When I was trained as a young manager, I was trained to do things like budgeting and planning and controlling. Those are things you do to people, not with people. And that's still a big part of it. So then you have the organizational obstacles, is Karen pointed out, you know, you talk to the average leader about their culture and about everything, it's going great, just ask them. Okay, if you ask CEOs and leaders to evaluate their commitment to their employees, their commitment to the organization, they give themselves great marks. There's just a small problem. If you ask the next level down, there's about a 30% delta in between how the people who work for them feel like they actually manifest that and how they do. And 30% is enough to create a pretty significant issue. And then the emotional obstacles. Change is hard. Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, the famous Harvard psychologist, made a comment that has stuck with me, where she said, you know, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. Change is great for other people. It's just when you're asking me to change. And so that is a very, very real one. And where it's also very, very real is like Karen and others, when I've worked with leaders, that's very, very hard to say to them, if you're going to get different results, you need to do something different. I think we're hearing this loud and clear, especially from the younger generations today. Is, you know, I just thought this was a great quote, is if I only sound a little disgruntled, okay, I'm not being loud enough. Okay, you guys are missing. So here we are where we have that situation where we have 50% of the people that don't trust leadership. So how do we change that? A few years ago, I came up with a model that says that in my experience in working in everything from high technology to banking and not-for-profits, that I have found that truly successful leaders embrace a critical set of skills and a critical set of competencies. The first one and the easiest one is technical competence. As a society, we get very, very excited about technical competence. You know, we love our CVs and business cards that have to have all those things on there and all the certifications and all that we have on them and everything and how smart we are. And that is the second level of what Covey talks about is trust. He talks about trust being on 3 levels. The first level is statutory trust, the trust we put in institutions, banks, the court systems, things like that. The second level, and Western society especially, is enamored with technical competence. Of course you should listen to me. First, I'm your boss. And number 2, let me show you my resume, how smart I am. So we should be done here. You should just follow me. The third level of trust is the more important level where the traction actually happens. And that's what he calls intimacy-based trust, which is trust based on relationships. In order to get to that next level, you have to even have a conversation about trust. I don't know about your experiences, but I'm not hearing a lot of conversations out there where we're talking about the dark little secret of, do our people trust us? Do we trust them? Do we, and that's the thing. You first have to be willing to have a conversation. The second thing is congruency, and I don't mean that in the mathematical sense we all learned in algebra. It's congruency in terms of your values. It's congruency in terms of your alignment with the organization. And having to have those conversations with people are saying, if you aspire to leadership, leadership is a gift that people that agree to follow you. And the key there is, there's a very smart consultant, Jesse Linstoner, who talked about the idea, people follow leaders. But if you're not, in order to be a leader, you have to start from a basis of trust. If you don't have trust, you are leading from a place of compliance. Well, if you want to know what compliance costs versus trust, it costs approximately $223 billion a year. Okay, so that's a pretty significant number. The next thing is you have to have leaders who are both emotionally and socially intelligent. Then you have to have people who are emotionally aware. It's interesting that, you look at people, and we've all met people, leaders who are absolutely brilliant. They're scientists, they're geniuses, they've got patents and stuff like that. They're also very mercurial. I don't know about any of you, and I've probably been that guy, where walking in on Monday morning wondering whether Dr. Jekyll or Dr. Hyde is coming in this morning. Okay, did my boss have a bad day? How was golf? How did things go? That's a very frightening thing for people when you hold their job in their hands, in terms of having to deal with that and the kind of reactions. And that comes in the emotional balances. I would submit that most organizations focus almost exclusively on technical competencies when they're doing their recruiting and selection and their promotion and their succession. That's what they're doing. And unfortunately, that model doesn't work. What I would also submit is most organizations are dealing with what I will call thin relationships versus thick relationships. Covey refers to the new paradigm as being, instead of focusing on tasks, instead of focusing on completion of tasks and checking off lists, we should be focusing on relationships and building relationships with people. So what's the upside of that? The upside of that is in a study of 250 companies that incorporated the things that Douglas and Karen talked about before, which is technology, which is culture, and then adding physical environment into that. He tracked 250 companies over a period of time, and these are some pretty exciting numbers, saying, well, why should I care? Average profitability of 4.2 times the rest of the control group. Profit per employee of 4 times. Revenue per employee of 2.8 times the others, and an average revenue of 2 times the others. They outperformed everybody else. Okay, they outperformed the S&P. So one of the things there is trust is not an investment. Trust is touchy-feely and it's soft and everything like that. I don't know. I'm going to submit that there are probably people sitting in this room that would like to have those numbers reflected when they stand in front of their board of directors quarterly and say, this is how we're doing compared to other people. This is what's going to make it happen. We've got to accept the fact that relationships are really critical. And we're at a time now where we have to decide whether we go forward or we go back. That's why Jeff and I wrote the book, to say we need to talk about these very, very difficult topics. We need to train managers and train leaders. We need to make sure that we're looking at the motivations for people who are moving into our leadership organizations. But what I submit to you is the positive part about that is referenced by these companies. This is not a cost. This is actually an investment. And this is the work that I do. I've had a tremendous degree of success. Just consistently, if you are willing to embrace and do those things, you will see the results. Is it hard? Absolutely. Is it uncomfortable? Absolutely. But when you accept the fact that leadership is something that you do with people and not to people, you will see a transformational situation occur both in your businesses and in your lives. Thank you.